Hey fam, this is Leslie, and I'm excited. Usually, you don't see us in the middle of the day, so don't be alarmed. There's nothing wrong with your computer. We are going live with Melissa Nelsen from Genevieve Wines in South Africa, and that's why we're in the middle of the day because it is 6:30 in the evening there. Hey Melissa, welcome.
Hi, Leslie. And yeah, it's 6:30, so I can have a glass of bubbles already. And I wish all the listeners a good glass later in the evening.
Yes, well, it's almost noon, and you know what they
Okay,
say, it's noon someplace.
good.
So it's almost noon. And
Yeah.
welcome, Christina. You're on mute, Christina.
There we go. I was worried I wasn't going to make it with my computer update, but we are good to go now. So I'm sorry you didn't hear me earlier. Welcome, Melissa, and cheers.
So,
There's
so
no
lovely.
rules.
Cheers.
No rules with bubbly. Bubbly is absent of
Yeah,
those rules.
yeah.
So, so this past quarter, our fall wine club quarter, we had the theme of France and South Africa. And it was inspired, one, I was telling you about our trip to South Africa. And then secondly, we incorporated France because the French have the grapes have a big over influence in South Africa winemaking. And the turn in how South Africans have made wine and are making wine is just, it makes you like take a step back and have a true appreciation for all of the great accomplishments that you're doing there. And your wine was one of the wines that was in our wine club. And
Cool.
so we love getting the inside scoop
Yes.
about like what went into it, who these people are, because I think wine has a story. It's not just the bottle, but it is, what's behind it. And I was reading up about your background. Like you literally are a cellar rat. Like you grew up in the tasting rooms and it just became full circle. So if you don't mind, can you
Sure.
please tell about yourself?
Cool. No, thanks for the opportunity. I think, yeah, when putting South Africa with France, and I just admire the South African industry so much. We celebrated Cap Classique, the beginning of Cap Classique. 2 years ago was the 50-year celebration, and so we've been making bubbles for 50 years. And I always look back, France champagne, they've been making it for so many longer years. And how we've changed from leaps to bounds to using stylistically just to get up with the quality. And so I think that's really great that you brought up that point, is that South African wine, where it's going, and the quality that's coming out from this country is just, yeah, it's just mind-blowing. And the personalities that are showing themselves, and yeah, the hard work that's going into it, like you say, it started in the tasting room. Didn't really come from this. Everything I'm doing now is very first generation. So sometimes daunting, but on the other hand, I think it's pretty exciting to take on something that you don't have your parents or your forefathers saying, well, this is how we did it. So I'm experimenting with the brand, experimenting just where we find ourselves. Like, now Genevieve is in America, and so it's all first steps for me. And I studied to be a pilot. That's what I did when my mom asked me in high school. She said, so, it was getting to the stage where you have to sort of decide on a career, and your subjects are then correlated against that. And she said, so what you going to do? And I said, oh, I'm not, nothing that requires me to be in an office. So maybe something like an air hostess, and she turned around and said, if you're going to be that person, why don't you be the pilot instead? And just the mindset was just, my mind just changed. Like, well, yeah. fortunately, I did really enjoy that. So that's the profession I studied, and did that for a couple of years, and then removed myself from that, moved back to my hometown down here in the Western Cape. I was up in Joburg, and at that stage, I just was trying to familiarize myself with what's happening in the area. And in Cape Town, there weren't many flying opportunities at that time, and got myself into the wine industry, and started in the tasting room based out in Bottreville, where it's a small little town. Not a one-horse town, but it has quite a lot of producers. We're 11 producers, all making phenomenal wines, all like totally in it with heart and passion. And I think that's what convinced me to do the next step, is seeing everything from the outside and seeing that excitement that you're going to be seeing when you come out in February with the harvest, and just the thought process that went into the winemakers' decision on what they're going to do and how they're going to pick it. And it opened my mind so much. And my partner, he was started off as a viticulturist, and we then moved to another farm in the area where he built a cellar for the owner and started making wine. And it was at that stage that I said, I love bubbles. So, they weren't quite sure of the styles they were wanting to produce. And I said, just make a bubbles, like just add that to your range. And he turned around, and it was very similar to what my mom said to me. He said, why don't you make it? And I went, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, maybe. So that was how I got into it. And the philosophy behind it was, if he'd made it, it would be, if you're making your favorite cup of coffee, for example, you have your flavor. And he said, you've got to create your own style and your own flavor. So that's where it started back in 2008. That was my first vintage. That was also really daunting. I'd managed to secure a beautiful, beautiful pocket of grapes very close to us in the Bottreville area, and amazingly, to this day, I'm still buying from that little pocket, which has just created mainly the ethos behind the Genvieve brand, is really working with each vintage as it comes along, and showcasing what the vintage has and what its personality is. And at that stage, also, I needed a teacher. I needed a mentor. So I was very fortunate in that as well, that I had one of the greatest in my books and many other people's books, Ross Gower, as a mentor. He'd been making some Cap Classique as well. And he was very generous in just saying, yes, come on board, come learn, come see. And so that was the first vintage we released in 2010. We always laugh again. I said to my partner and to friends, I said, how much wine do you think I should make? Or how many bottles? And his response, the friends and my partner's response were like, more than we can drink.
We're here. We'll happily share. It's very yummy.
So the first vintage was 5,000 bottles. For me then, that was a huge amount. I was taking on a big financial risk, not knowing, especially with Cap Classique, as with champagne, we aging longer, to mature the wine to a quality that really shows itself and shows the expression. So yeah, that's in a nutshell.
Were you aging? Okay, first of all, most people don't start off with bubbles. Most people start off with like a nice little Pinot Noir or a red blend, but you started off with bubbles. And I love your spirit of, okay, let's just try it. Let's do it. So how long were you in 2008? You said that was your first vintage. So did you start making the wine in 2006? Were you aging it then? Was it like 24 months on the lees?
The first vintage was a 2008 vintage, which I then released in 2010.
Okay.
So that good for 2 years. And I was really, really fortunate that first vintage sold out really quickly to really great hotels and restaurants in Cape Town. And I jumped to the next vintage, the 2009, quite quickly. And by the next vintage, the 2010 vintage, I suddenly realized, oi, I've got to actually start realizing what the bigger picture of the Genvieve is. And number one had always been my mind quality, showcasing a terroir, showcasing a personality, and I basically, with the 2010 vintage, I took back everything and went off the market for about a year just to get into the correct aging cycle, which the aging cycle now is a minimum of 3.5 years before we release it.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So we've got into that cycle. COVID was a great help in not many sales, so we've been able to mature longer.
There's an upside to everything.
Always. I often say to myself and others, there's such a fine line between bravery and stupidity. And I mean, most times I think, you only know you were brave after the event, but during it, you think you're stupid.
That's a very interesting take on that. I actually have a question for you, because we have this, as Leslie mentioned in the beginning, the comparison and that kind of head-to-head with France and South Africa. And I would like for you to kind of explain a little bit the Cap Classique for people who are not familiar, because when people think of bubbles, obviously champagne is pretty much the first thing that comes to mind. But there are so many different styles of bubbles, and the méthode or the méthodois champenois in Champagne can also be done in other areas, and how that relates to you, being that this is 100% Chardonnay. And then uniquely, the tie-in is the name Genevieve, which happens to be the patron saint of Paris.
Yeah,
correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that has a little bit of personal history for you. So I was curious about that.
Cool. So I'll start first with the Cap Classique and the method. So Cap Classique basically is explaining the method. It's made, Cap Classique is always made, when you see the word Cap Classique on a bubbles bottle, it means that it's been made in the traditional method, as in Champagne. What is so cool about South Africa is quite a few years ago, the Cap Classique Association was formed, and with the intention to really have a great relationship with Champagne, but to create a unique identity, because our weather is different, our terroir is different, but that nonetheless didn't take away from what we could learn and what we could, the technology and different methods of producing really great bubbles, Cap Classique. So I always say, we've been really fortunate as the Cap Classique Association to visit Champagne every second year sometimes, and great relationships because of the respect of what we're doing, and we've got our own name for making it in the traditional method. So that traditional method basically means that you would make a base wine, you'd bottle the wine, and you'd add your sugar and your yeast, and your second fermentation would happen in the bottle, and that's what equates to traditional method. For me and my style, it was always important to look at how Champagne stylistically was being made. It was also really important to, I was very lucky that I met people that introduced me to a whole lot of small growers. So I got to taste their base wines, which is before that second fermentation actually happens. And that was the most education I got, like in 4 days. It was like, in reality, it was like 5 years information download that I was getting. And that for me created a really strong base of stylistically how I wanted to go forward, but also how important your vineyard is and how important your base wine is. And I think what is so cool, I always wear the Cap Classique Association hat as well, because the guys that are producing Cap Classique in South Africa it's generally, it's all about quality, and our hope is that when you walk to a shelf and you only see South African Cap Classique, it doesn't matter which name you're taking. Obviously, Genvieve is, would be nice, but you're going to be guaranteed quality, and that's what we're striving for, is really skilled winemaking, a lot of thought going into how we're looking after vineyards, where our grapes are from. So Champagne is an area, and that's, it has a radius. What's quite interesting in South Africa, not I don't do it, but it's really beautiful to take into concept, is that South Africa Cap Classique produces, the radius is much larger of wine production. So you could buy Chardonnay from a cooler climate area and blend it with Chardonnay from a warmer climate area and get, a different composition that would make an amazing bubbles. I focused myself purely on that one vineyard. It was also because of not having a lot of education around what I'm doing, and that was a learning process. And as the years passed, I realized that I'm actually sitting with a really great privilege that I'm being able to get from one vineyard, getting to know that vineyard so well. It was really interesting when I started. I was picking, as the book said, and as I got to know the vineyard, I was like, no, if I pick it a week later, there's a fruit profile that's jumping that I can't get in the cellar. I can get this rather in the vineyard. And that changed that way from just probably 2010. And I've been doing that way for so many years, just because I've been able to get to know my vineyard so well. So different methods of harvesting and sourcing grapes in South Africa, but the method that it's made in is Champagne method. Yeah. Oh, and the Genevieve.
Yes.
So,
I thought that was a really nice touch, and how perfect.
Yeah. So, and it's, I mean, I just think it's, that's where we're getting our information from, is France and Champagne, and it tied in really beautifully. And I just thought, no one knows, it's my second name. And I think my mom would be proud that it's being used at some stage. It's now been widely used.
They spent quite a bit of time in Paris, if I recollect, learning a little bit.
In and out when they were younger, that typical student backpacking, and I just think that joie de vie, that life, and being able to enjoy the glass of wine at midday, but enjoy the life with that. I think
it came full circle, the name then.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, I did.
Christina had mentioned you use primarily Chardonnay. Have you ever considered using Pinotage in your bubbly at all?
So interestingly not. So I have started making a rosé that hasn't entered USA yet, but it will, I think, next year. So we eventually, I managed to buy a farm in Bot River, which I'm immensely proud of. And the farm had some Sauvignon Blanc, which I've grafted over to Chardonnay. The vineyard that I've been using is now 28 years old. So, that also gives such great characteristics. And it's there's a fantastic word in Afrikaans, one of the languages in South Africa, but it's called houding, and that means personality, and I just love it because it's houding. But it's and so for me it was, there's a 28-year-old vineyard that's its yield is going to become less, and I really love the cooler climate of the Bot River area, so I wanted to carry on sourcing and having my own Chardonnay eventually. So the Sauvignon Blanc was grafted over to Chardonnay. And then I had a little bit of a predicament, because there were some other grapes that were planted on the vineyard, and they were Shiraz. And I've always maintained that there are so many great still winemakers out there. So I only want to stick to bubbles. That's my passion. and started experimenting with picking the Shiraz a little earlier, just to see what kind of flavor profile we're getting from that. Like I say, we're a cooler climate area, so the Shiraz in this area often has a tendency for more of a Syrah style, so a lighter style. And so now I'm making rosé bubbles from Shiraz, and it's tasting beautiful. It confuses people; they think it's Pinot Noir, but it's a great educational tool as well. In South Africa, we are allowed to use any varietal to make Cap Classique, and I think people are, there is some experimentation, not widely, because again, it's what the grape can give you and what the quality can give. So Pinotage is used. That's the great South African varietal. Simonsich actually uses it in their rosé. They do the 3P, so they do Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier, and then for the South African flag, they put in a bit of the Pinotage. I've learned to never say never, but I'm loving the Shiraz. The Shiraz is the dominant varietal in our area, so it feels like I'm being part of the party, but I'm just making bubbles from it.
And when does that come out to the US?
Oh, we're going to have to speak to Peter, but I think Peter's with Culture Wine, and I think he's just started up, and I think it was really a great initiative to only introduce the Blanc de Blanc, the Chardonnay, to the public. I'm sure that the rosé is going to fly, but he's starting out his company, and I think starting small and growing and creating the excitement around that is part of his intention of creating a great brand, Culture Wine.
And he's doing a great job. We were so excited to be able to get them when Leslie found. I think I was just excited to see all of the different options that were available, and to learn about you. And it's like, bubbles is my go-to. So
cool.
when I see the South African bubbles, and then to hear you say Shiraz, you have that as well. I'm going to jump on everything that you have that comes to the US. So very excited about that.
No, I think it's going to do well. It's I have been exporting it to Europe for quite a while, and it's a conversation piece as well. People, they're always comparing Cap Classique to champagne. What's quite nice is that because we're not stuck in a formality of many hundreds of years, is that we can experiment, and that's the great thing about South African Cap Classique. Price wise, it's always less than champagne.
Yes.
And so you can buy 2 bottles for one.
I always tell people the quality is so great, right?
Yes.
And if you're looking for a superior sparkling, but you don't want to pay the price point of a champagne, you should look at Cap Classique. And people often look at me with a blank stare because they're not familiar with it. And I was reading Peter's website when he mentioned that South Africa makes up 1% of the wine population in the world. Do you see that? Do you see that growing? Do you see that it's growing in popularity?
I think definitely so. It's quite interesting from a South African export. Cap Classique is one of the fastest growing trends of export. So I think it's just time, and I think the misconception of South African wine, it's just time. So it's about going out there, showing your wines, having wonderful ambassadors that are willing to taste the wine and say, this was actually really good. I really like the story. So I think we are moving in leaps and bounds. I think the younger generation, and I can refer to myself. I'm sure you guys are the same, but they want everything to happen now.
Yeah.
And I think with wine, you know, you've got to go through all those processes. We did a lot of, South Africa was selling a lot of bulk wine, and that's what it was known for. And, you know, so price wise, you know, so we've got to start identifying the smaller producers and what they're bringing to the party, and listening to the stories that are coming out from South Africa. As you know, that's a real story. There's big companies and they're doing phenomenal things because they have worked hard on their budgets to spread the word, and I'm really appreciative of that. I think, you know, having a lot of big producers, sure, that's made a huge influx into putting South African brands out there. But I think it's just growing. I think it's just if we can do a little step every year, that's great. I mean, I always say I'm never going to be champagne, but I want South African bubbles to be known as something else. You can have the champagne, you can have the cava, you can have the, you know, and then have the South African bubbles or the Cap Classique as well. So I think it's growing. I think it's growing really positively.
Every year, I'm not sure if they did it this year, but the embassy, the South African embassy, will hold a tasting, an industry tasting, and you know, like the Grand Becks will be there, what have you, and I every time on my comment card, I'm like, you got to get the smaller producers here, because as important as the large champagne houses, the large sparkling producers are in South Africa, the smaller ones are equally as important, because it provides a character that isn't standardized each time. Like, you're able to see these other producers there. So hopefully one day somebody will read my comment card and incorporate the smaller.
I was at the one in May.
Yes.
Because Peter arranged it for us, and so I was there with Brookdale, who's it's not a big producer, and it was great. It was great to be a small producer in a room with some big producers, and it's exactly like you say. I think the big thing is, you know, it's to do the marketing costs money, and I've always, you know, we've got to work smaller producers. We've got to work that into putting ourselves out there and walking the streets and just telling them about ourselves. So I think a lot of the smaller producers are really understanding that, and really just, you know, getting on a flight and coming out and arranging tastings. And so again, I think it's changing, and the stories of the smaller producers are just great. I mean, I think you're allowed a lot more freeway to say, you know, that the bigger companies, you've got not standards, but you've got, like, you know, you've got your message that you have to give across, and
right.
I think that's why for me.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, it's just, I think that was one of the things that when I decided to release a vintage every year and not do a non-vintage, it was quite a big step to put that identity in, saying, like, I'm fine to showcase a wine that has the Genevieve signature always running through it, but it's going to taste different. And I was quite happy to showcase a different vintage of what happened with the weather, what happened with, you know, and I think bigger producers, it's so risky to do that, but with smaller producers, you have more of a chance to explain yourself and showcase why you let that happen. Yeah.
I think it's important too for the general population, because wine is ever changing. So you're not going to get the same. I mean, you have the winemaker portion of it that goes into that, but Mother Nature is going to give you what Mother Nature gives you. Yeah. And you really have to you have an intention, but you really have to be prepared. And, you know, the wines, especially like you had mentioned from the Bot River, they're very specific because it's such a, it's a very concentrated district and area of the Western Cape. And so that distinction, I think, is what really puts it out there for you and you're showcasing it very well. You might make a style that's similar to champagne, but the whole point, I think, like what you were saying, is to really be representative of the area and express what the terroir and Mother Nature gives you there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I always say I feel Bot River is pretty moderate and balanced. I mean, we have beautiful cold winters, but we don't have that. We don't have real frost. We have beautiful summers, but not too hot. So, you know, we highly influenced by the maritime. So as the crow flies from this farm, we're about 3 kilometers. So I can't do the conversion very quickly, but 3 kilometers. And so in summer, we've got beautiful sea breeze coming through. And it does create for very easy, in a sense, you know, compared to frost or intense high heat days. So that's why I love this area, because, you know, Mother Nature is going to give you something, and here it's always like it's a little bit more gentle. I always feel. Yeah.
Are you closer to where the Bot River is? And excuse my ignorance. Are you closer to like the Indian Ocean side, or?
Yeah, so we're very close to the Indian Ocean.
Okay.
So I don't know if you know, so Hermanus is about 25 minutes away. Cape Town is about an hour and a quarter away. So
Oh, okay. Okay.
really nicely. Yeah, I always think it's great, especially for tourists coming out. You know,
Yeah.
in an hour and a half max, you're in a beautiful little farming area. So it's really easy to visit as well. It's not a strenuous,
Okay.
it's not a strenuous drive.
There you go, Leslie. That needs to be a stop.
I know. Like, I'm going to reach out to them today saying, hey, what
Yeah.
about this place? Yes.
We'd love to
Yeah.
host you.
You know, just a stop on the way for lunch.
Yeah, and a glass of bubbles.
Yes.
Exactly.
And the rosé bubbles, the Shiraz rosé.
I know. That's going to be hard to bring back. You think?
Nope.
Well,
I won't tell if you won't tell.
Nope. Not at all.
I'm telling you right now.
Not
put on
at
a
all.
shopping list.
You will not.
That's funny.
So, Melissa, what can we expect from you in the next couple of years? I know we talked about the rosé. Is there anything else that you'd like to share?
So what has reached America is so I often try and introduce a vintage that's slightly different. So I also produce a zero dosage Brut Nature on vintages that are really phenomenal in the vineyard. The 2021 is showcasing itself. So I do a portion of it then zero dosage and a portion of it as the normal bottle.
Okay.
But this year, or late last year, I released a 2013 vintage. Again, for me, it was so important to showcase how South African Cap Classique can age and mature so well. I think, you know, if I'd released a 10-year-old Bubbles 5 years ago, people would have thought, like, what's wrong? Can't you sell it? But again, you know, I refer to champagne a lot. But in champagne, you can drink a 10-year-old Bubbles and not even think it's 10 years old. And
Right.
so I've tried to do something very similar, to release a 10-year-old that I feel shows lovely fresh acidity. It has those lovely secondary flavors of maturing. I've also done it as an extra brut, again, just showcasing that vintage and showcasing what was happening in that vintage. And also because it's just come together so well that I just thought, you know, let's try and show its natural essence quite a bit. So that's reached America, and we've only done 3,000 bottles, and it's doing really well here in South Africa, and in Europe it's doing nicely as well. So I always have something that's a little bit different up my sleeve, and it will be a small production, but again it's again just relating back to Cap Classique and what Genvieve has to offer, and what its quality is, but also what, 5 years. Well, the first Zero Dosage I released was 2015. And, a lot of people in South Africa didn't know what Brut Nature Zero Dosage is, no sugar added to the final product. And it was again, an education process. And now there's a waiting list for it. So, but the 2013 has been similar. People are like, a 10-year-old. And I'm like, yeah, it's great, taste it. and they're like, oh, wow, that's great. Okay, got it. But also to show that if you buy a bottle of Cap Classique, you can mature it. If it's good bubbles, it's matured. We tend, I don't know if you guys are the same, but I buy a bottle of bubbles and I do tend to drink it the next week or the next week.
Fairly quickly. On a regular basis is a better thing to say.
But they age beautifully. They retain such freshness and such acidity, and so that's something new. And there's always something. We're always doing stuff on the farm. It's really great to have visitors come visit us and show them around. And we really put out the intention to be as welcoming to people that want to just come and see. I mean, so many people live in cities, and it's just great when people come to the farm and go walk around, go see the vegetable patch, go see the vineyards, understand what's happening in the vineyards this time of year. So that's also wonderful to have people visit us.
Thank you for saying that, because just between us girls, Christina and I were having that conversation about the 2013 vintage, and the conversation kind of circled around, like, could we convince people to purchase it because they saw the older vintage? And I'm glad you said it, where you're like, well, they could not sell it or what have you. So it's good to hear that, like, you're thinking the same thing that we're thinking, that, it's a quality wine. It's just people aren't used to seeing an older vintage, much less a vintage at all on a sparkling. So thank you for saying that.
But that's so standard. I mean, in all honesty, I think bubbles is the only thing that you can rely on, just depend on, that, especially when you have a vintage, there's something extra special about that.
Yeah.
And bubbles goes a long way, which is one of the other reasons it's my favorite wine, because if you, keep it properly, it just, like you said, you can drink it and it doesn't age like you would think a red or a French white Burgundy is going to age. It has a completely different structure and profile. So ageability in bubbles, especially the Genvieve, is worthwhile and worth checking out. So I hope people do.
Yeah.
So Melissa, thank you so much for your time. Can you let people know, are you on social media, how they can follow you?
Yeah, that would be great. I will do so.
Oh, do you know off the top of your head?
So no, sorry. I thought you said I must post this now, so I didn't actually hear what you said. Say again,
Oh,
please.
no. Are you on social media?
I am. Genevieve MCC Bubbly.
Is that for Instagram
For
and
Instagram,
Facebook?
sorry. For Instagram, Facebook is Genevieve Bubbly.
I'm just
getting me all confused now.
I'm sorry.
You're not the only one. You're not the only one. I just, yes. Leslie does that way better than I do.
Just check.
I'm just putting it in the comments so people can go and follow you and check you out.
Genevieve MCC on Facebook, and Genevieve MCC Bubbly on Instagram. And the reason why there's the MCC is it's method Cap Classique, so it's made in the traditional method.
Okay,
love it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for your time, and I'm definitely going to be in touch. So
I hope so.
I'll send you an email and let you know. what we're doing.
So
Yeah.
great to meet you guys. And thank you, and enjoy. May the hours be short so you can enjoy another glass today.
Yes. Cheers.
Thank you. Cheers.